welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us in this latest Basis Technologies webinar in our series of webinars around test and DevOps automation for SAP. As you can see on the screen today, very happy to say that we've got a joint webinar today between Basis Technologies and smartShift Technologies around this topic of how to accelerate and de-risk your move to S/4HANA with automation. More details on that in a moment. My name is Peter Yabsley. I'm the head of product marketing here at Basis Technologies, and I'll be your host for today. And there are a couple of much more important people on the call who are going to be giving us some insight throughout today's webinar, and I'll introduce those in a moment. Just before I do, usual little bit of webinar admin at the start of today's session. So all attendees will see that you're on mute at the moment. But if you do have questions that you'd like to ask during the session, we would encourage you to enter those in the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll get to as many of those as we can at the end of the session. And this is a recorded session like all Basis Technologies webinars. So we will be sending out a link to the recording to everybody who's registered after the webinar has finished. So you should see that in the next day or two at the latest. And if you don't get that link and you want to get hold of it to review that recording or share it with colleagues, do please get in touch with us, and we'll have some details at the end of the webinar of how you can do that. But you can just go to our website if you don't have another route. So let's get on with today's Basis Technologies webinar in partnership, as I've said, with smartShift Technologies. To begin with, I just want to do a quick introduction to the two companies involved in today's session, in case there's anyone in our audience who isn't familiar with both of them. At Basis Technologies, we are the pioneers of DevOps for SAP. So as it says here on the screen, we're really experts in change control and application delivery. And we've been around for more than 20 years, specializing only in SAP software. And we're helping clients all around the world to manage their transition to S4 more quickly and effectively. And we partner with smartShift Technologies as one of the companies that we work with around the world. And they're an elite transformation and management partner to the world's leading enterprise IT companies, also very much in the automation space. And they've pioneered different kinds of automated system transformation, including, as you can see there, S4 transition as well. And that's why we are here today together talking about this topic of accelerating and de-risking that move to S/4HANA. So in terms of today's speakers, let's do some quick introductions. As I've said, much more important people on today's session than me. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by David Lees, Basis Technologies CTO, and Arndt Hoffman, who's the EVP and GM of smartShift's global SAP practice. So gentlemen, thank you both very much for joining us today. I know you've both been involved in the world of SAP for quite some time. So could you just give our audience a very quick intro to your background before we begin the session? Arndt, maybe you could go first.
Yeah, hello everyone. Yeah, my name is Arndt. I'm heading up the global SAP practice at smartShift with the company since the start. We started smartShift in 2002, and since then in different roles here, helping our customers to automate their IT transformation. Before that, multiple years in SAP consulting. So I fear I'm living in SAP and SAP ecosystem since 25 years.
Living the SAP dream, fantastic. And David, yourself?
Yeah, similar kind of SAP dream. No, I've been with Basis just over 2 years now. Prior to that, I spent most of my career more on the customer side. So I was in a large consumer goods company for over 20 years. Also, kind of connected to SAP. From different perspectives, implementations, support, upgrades, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of first-hand experience of this type of activity.
Okay, great. Thank you, gents. Well, great to have you with us. So let's take a quick look at today's agenda before we dive in. We're going to start with actually a short discussion around the slightly bigger picture of how firms are approaching this move to S4 and some of the key technical challenges that come up around that process, and then we'll go on to look at that topic of how automation can help in reducing that cost and time to value, and also the risk involved in that move to S4 and that big project. And we're going to look at two of those technical challenges in particular in more detail as well, areas that Basis Technologies and smartShift specialize in, around how we manage custom code and also deal with dual maintenance. And we'll have some real life customer examples to illustrate these as we go through as well. And then we're going to have another short discussion also about how the role that automation can play after that S4 migration and the value it can bring there, because there's certainly very much more than just the project work involved here in terms of how automation can help. So let's get started with that question of some of the key technical challenges and that bigger picture around S4 transition. We know, and I'm sure that many of our audience on the call today are familiar with the many different ways that there are for companies to get to S4 depending on their different circumstances. Lots of advice is out there in the market, lots of advice and ways to go available. I mean, Arndt, maybe you could just kick us off in terms of, what does the velocity of S4 adoption look like from smartShift's perspective? SAP keep telling us it's speeding up, more and more people making the move now. Is that what you guys are seeing in the market?
Yeah, definitely, partially, but I think you have to look at two distinct groups of customers. As you know, there was this new end-of-life date announced from SAP for SAP ECC with 2027 and extended maintenance till 2030. And that definitely had an impact on one part of the customer base. So they are taking full advantage of that. But we also see that this group is also starting to prepare for the actual S4HANA move with analyzing, preparing, cleaning up. And then there's obviously the other group, which takes a more proactive approach to S4HANA. There was an impact, obviously, by COVID last year, but we now see a lot of these companies picking up the S4HANA journey again, taking a proactive approach to that. And yeah, we definitely see the velocity increasing there.
And David, I mean, what about for Basis Technologies customers we work with? I think similar kinds of companies to our colleagues at smartShift there. Are you seeing a similar kind of dynamic?
Yeah, I think we're both targeting the kind of the larger enterprise end of the SAP market. Yeah, I think maybe picking up slightly. Obviously, COVID has had some of an impact on the pace with which companies are kind of starting their transformation journey. But I would certainly expect that will speed up as SAP is indicating as we kind of move through the rest of this year and into next year.
Yeah, so when it comes to the actual project itself, and I'm sure this is the area that our audience is specifically interested in today. How do you find your clients approaching this sort of bigger picture? Is there such a thing as typical? Do you find your clients have a clear idea of what they want to do and the pros and cons of each side, or is that something they're more often looking for advice on?
Yeah, as we see on this slide, there's obviously the classical brownfield approach and greenfield approach, with both having its benefits. Pure brownfield tends to be more seen as a technical path to getting to S4HANA in a faster way. On the other hand, the greenfield approach, which gives more optionality when it comes to business harmonization, business process re-engineering. On the other hand, and then there's a lot of other flavors, as you see, also driven by some players in the market. A typical trend, what we see, despite it being brownfield or greenfield, we see and moved in the market that customers are looking for smart ways to getting to S4, right? And that includes, on the one hand, taking optionality and trying to actually gain quick wins. But on the other hand, also getting faster in the whole process and don't get lost in science projects. As many customers had started a greenfield journey, we see that they think about the whole approach and get back to some smarter ways of getting to S4.
And David, as you mentioned, I know you've got plenty of personal experience around this area. I mean, how do you see the pros and cons of these various different approaches and how companies might attack this S4 transformation?
Yeah, I think it's very dependent upon the come from state for the customer. How many ECC landscapes are they talking about? To what extent do they want to transform the technical landscape in addition to potentially the business transformation side of things? And it's not always one size fits all. It could be appropriate in some cases to do something like a kind of a mix and match, or in other cases something closer towards the brownfield end of the spectrum within the same customer.
Okay, so very much organization dependent and circumstance dependent then, which I guess is no surprise to anyone, but it sets us up for, you know, the more specific parts of the conversation we're going to have today. So let's take a quick look at that and think about some of these specific pain points in a typical S4HANA transformation. And we've got a few of the common big ones on the screen here. I mean, David, can you give us sort of your view on these or other of the key technical challenges in that S4 journey and migration?
Yeah, generally for the larger enterprises, they're obviously going to be focused on things like downtime minimization. There's only so much downtime that they can absorb or accept, and that may influence the type of transformation they have. As mentioned before, the level to which they are re-architecting their technical landscape can play a role, and this may be a trigger for them to look to move to the cloud from a hosting standpoint before, during, or after their S4 move. There's a big element of understanding to what extent the customer wants this to be a technical project, and to what extent they're looking to really drive process transformation with either the inclusion of Fiori or with the elimination of custom code and kind of the opportunity to go back to standard, so to speak. But one of the ones that I wouldn't say is overlooked, but can be seen later in the project planning is really the dual maintenance, which is one of the areas we're going to focus on today, and that's something I'll be talking about in a little bit more detail later on.
Thanks, David. And I know a couple of things that David has mentioned there you're going to also get into in a later discussion. So does what David was saying there track with what smartShift clients tend to be struggling with? Is there anything sort of specific that stands out alongside what we're going to talk about today?
Well, when I first saw this slide, I was heavily reminded to the old technical migration projects in SAP coming from 4.6c, 4.7 Unicode conversions, right? With S4HANA, you obviously have a stronger focus on the whole business process transformation side, but outside of that, it is the same pain points you have to tackle. And as David mentioned, custom code and dual maintenance is still on the critical path. And if you don't master these areas, you might get in trouble with your transformation project.
Okay, great. Whoops. Okay, well, we've jumped ahead one there, but let's look at that then. Let's consider why we're going to talk particularly about custom code and dual maintenance today, out of all those potential areas that are ripe for acceleration and greater efficiency through the use of automation. And you can see on the screen here some numbers from the experience that smartShift and Basis Technologies have had with our clients that can emphasize the potential scale of those two questions around custom code and dual maintenance. So as we can see, and I'm sure this will ring bells with some people on the call, we can easily be talking about thousands of objects here. We can be talking about millions of lines of code in a typical ECC system, and the end result of that is really a large amount of issues that need to be addressed, remediated, in order to make that move to S4 effective and make sure that things run correctly when you get there. And we could be talking about tens of thousands potentially of those kind of issues in different categories, and in turn that's going to drive a far greater volume of change and of transports through those old and new systems than we'd normally expect to see, which of course is going to bring more risk to the process, more work and more time and effort and delay. So the challenge around these two areas is quite considerable, and accelerating and improving our approach to custom code remediation and dual maintenance can actually have quite a major impact on an S4 program. And just to give a sense of that and take a quick glimpse, we're going to come back to this later, but just wanted to give a feel at the beginning of today's presentation of the kind of savings and the kind of impact that we can talk about in terms of really a huge reduction in manual effort, for example, and risk and cost in these particular technical areas we're going to look at today. So just wanted to put those numbers up there to give a taste of what we're talking about and why we're talking about it. But let's dive in and start with that question of custom code and managing the custom code situation as we move from ECC to S4. So Arndt, perhaps you can explain this challenge a little bit more for us.
Yeah, before I get into that, you saw it on the previous slide. When we talk about custom code, often we use words like burden or challenge, so it's not the most popular thing in the world when we talk about S4HANA. But obviously, custom code has been built over the past 20, 30 years in SAP system. Not everything is used. We have these statistics that 40 to 60% are not used. But we still think there was, in many cases, there was a good reason to build custom processes in SAP systems. Either the standard functionality was not there, or they are simply, our customers implemented strategic processes which differentiate them, right? So therefore, we should not always talk about a burden. It is also, there's something good in this piece of custom processes. The question then, when it comes to S4HANA, what is the most efficient way to actually handle this custom code during an S4HANA transformation process? We have seen these numbers, right? 20,000 objects here, X thousands HANA issues, performance issues, S4HANA changes in the database structure and things like that. This is all tedious work which you have to handle. We talked also about the different scenarios. You see them here on the screen. You have either the Brownfield scenario, where you take your ECC system, you look at the custom code base, you identify the ones which are used, the others which are not used, you get rid of them, and then the rest you convert, you optimize for HANA, for S4HANA, and maybe you would do some additional optimization. Most of our customers tend to not stop at this first step after they have converted their systems to S4HANA, but they continue the journey. So continuing the journey means then also looking at real modernization of the systems, better packaging, clustering applications, and then maybe later on even carving out these applications to business technology platform, sub-cloud platform, or even outside of SAP to microservice platforms. The other scenario leads to the same end result. It's a little different. You focus more on the business processes at the start. You do your fit gap workshops, and then you decide what gets out of the system, what of the processes you can bring back to standard, and the others which you want to keep and convert because they are strategic and you need to move to S4HANA. And then again, for them, you bring them over to S4, you optimize them, and maybe, as I said, also later on cluster them and carve them out of the system. The question is, how do I do that in an effective way? You can hire a lot of developers, or you utilize your own teams for that. Or our answer has been, since pretty much 20 years, there are smarter ways of doing that. And the smarter way from our perspective is automation. So we have built the last 20 years this custom code transformation engine. Some people looking at that picture call it a washing machine, which helps with this process of adapting and modernizing applications in a very efficient way. I actually like the picture of a washing machine because we take code into the machine, we clean it, And then we, at the end, we bring out cleaned custom code. You can even decide if you want 30 degrees or the full-blown 90 degrees program, right? You can scale that. And at the end, it's much faster than using a washboard to do it by hand, right? So the picture fits somewhere. And the process, it's pretty simple. We read information from the existing SAP system. We also read custom code, usage logs. We read additional information from SAP standard tools. Then we load everything into our tooling, do additional analysis, deconstruct it, and then apply so-called transformation rules to the code. We have around about 1,000 of transformation rules for different categories: HANA, S/4HANA, code security, code standardization. We apply that, and at the end, we load code back to an SAP system using standard processes from SAP with the updated code, all integrated into quality assurance processes. Just to talk about the scale of change we can do here, we just, in the course of completing a big project for a retailer in Germany, where we have corrected 150,000 custom objects, correcting 500,000 issues in the system, and the whole project timeline for this part was 4.5 weeks. And to mention another factor, because we have an algorithmic approach to that, so we don't use people for the changes, we have extreme high quality ratios. So out of these 500,000 changes, we received 5 tickets in testing. And that is the full benefit of this automation which we provide in projects. So the example I just gave, that was maybe one of the extreme examples from scale and number of custom objects. The next example on the next slide shows a little bit more the depth and breadth of changes we can do. That is our customer, actually BMW in Munich, a long-standing customer of ours, whom we help to actually modernize and migrate 69 SAP systems over the next 5.5 years. And for them, one of the systems, their core logistic template, we really helped to modernize in a selective way. So it was not that big brownfield conversion I just talked about. It was really a selective modernization of the system. At the end, we ended up with an SAP core which had 90% less custom code. And especially what we did, we unmingled the whole custom coding so that it is easier to maintain in the future. And we reduced the dependencies between business processes by 95%. And that is a pretty nice example of the way we want to work and the benefits we want to provide. We want to help our customers to get in a more agile way of development in the future. One of the main factors in this project was, as it was also a multi-year project, was dual maintenance, where we also utilized our automation. But David will now talk a little more about the dual maintenance aspects of these projects in the next section.
Great, thanks, Arndt. So very a brief overview there of the power of automation in addressing that custom code challenge for all the benefits that custom code can bring. David, yeah, as Arndt said, over to you. Let's talk about the challenge of dual maintenance, which tends to go hand in hand with those code changes, and as you said, I think can sometimes be underestimated.
Sure. So let's move to the next slide. What I wanted to do first was just to make sure everyone had a kind of common understanding of what we mean by dual maintenance. To be honest, regardless of which path you take on the transformation, there will be a period after you've created your S4 development system, and as you're building out the functionality, as you're doing the custom code remediation, as you're deciding how to address simplification items or how to set up the new S4 system, all the way through until the point here in kind of phase 5, when you're fully up and running on the new S4 landscape, there will be a period of time, and that could be anything from as short as 6 months up to multiple years, during which these two ECC and S4 landscapes will be operating in parallel. Depending upon how you've chosen to create that S4 development system, be it brownfield conversion of your existing ECC dev or ECC prod system, or some kind of shell-based approach or mix and match approach, there will be changes continuing to happen in the ECC system, because in most cases, the types of companies we're working with can't impose change freezes or change moratoriums during such a long period of time. And so they will want to operate to a certain extent business as usual with their standard project portfolio. So during that entire period, it's all a question of identifying what changes that are still happening on the ECC side matter and should be considered for dual maintenance into the S4 landscape. Is there a need to declare one of these dev systems as a kind of a master and to lock down the other one so that it can only receive updates via either a very small group of people or via transports from the lead landscape? And really, how do you manage a high volume of change in a coordinated, governed, kind of low risk way to ensure that when the final transition to S4 takes place, you aren't encountering any issues that are simply caused by not having correctly identified live and ongoing changes that needed to be replicated correctly in the S4 system. So as we look at that, there's a number of different things to consider. Firstly, at a very high level, there's two different types of changes that are happening in an ECC landscape. We can move to the next slide. The first of those are changes associated with configuration or customizing. And for that, traditionally during an upgrade, you can move most of those changes across from one version to the next. With S4, that's slightly more complicated in the sense of a number of what SAP calls simplification items that have been introduced that basically mean that in some cases, those transports, those changes can't simply be merged or imported into the S4 development system. They would have to be reviewed and potentially manually rekeyed or adapted into the S4 system. But in many cases, because the underlying code is the same, a certain percentage of those configuration changes can be automatically applied. In addition, as we look at the second key type of changes, which is the workbench changes, as we saw previously, there are typically tens of thousands of custom objects, millions of lines of code that in many cases a customer will choose to retain a significant portion of that in a brownfield or a shell or even mix and match type scenario. When they have been correctly and rapidly remediated using offerings, for example, from the likes of smartShift, you've still got a different set of code on your S4 side from what you have in your source ECC system. And while the business is continuing to operate, while that code continues to evolve on the ECC side, again, you have a challenge to understand how do you, in the most efficient way, bring together the changes that have taken place on your ECC landscape together with all of the remediation that's happened on the S4 landscape. So it's a lot about trying to automate as much as possible. It's all about trying to ensure a very strong governance around what change has taken place and needs to be dual maintained. A lot of that can be done with the likes of analyzers, and so this is where the active control product from Basis Technologies kind of sits alongside the smartShift service, as well as some of the smartShift tools that can be embedded as part of a multi-year transformation journey. I'm going to take a look at two different patterns, two different types of dual maintenance, depending upon how the customer is choosing to migrate. The first one, which is a slightly simpler one, is where after changes have been promoted into the ECC production system, they get identified and they get effectively moved into a queue for dual maintenance into the S4 development system. A handful of those will be identified as something that can't be automatically imported, and so will need to be reviewed and potentially manually adjusted into the S4 system. In addition, all of the Workbench objects can be assessed against smart retrofit to understand and to automate how best to merge, and even at the same time as merging, to remediate any new code that has been introduced into those objects, or even in brand new objects that have been created, alongside the smart retrofit capability. So that really the goal here is to ensure that as much as possible can be automatically dual maintained into the S4 landscape, after which it is then deployed through the S4 track to whichever point the project is at that point in time. If they're still working in the development system, obviously there still could be many months ahead. Maybe they're already at the stage where they're doing the S4 user acceptance testing, in which case it would go into the QA system, or it might be just before cutover, and as they're getting ready, that these changes need to be brought in to reflect whatever has changed on the business side, be it legal entity changes, currency configurations, et cetera, that need to be correctly reflected prior to the business cutting over. The second approach or pattern, and this is especially true if a company is moving to S4 in a series of waves, in which you could have both an S4 landscape fully up and running in parallel to an ECC landscape. That could be if a company is moving certain functions to S4, like, for example, moving finance to S4 prior to supply chain moving, or in some cases, if a company is looking to drive a consolidation, bringing down the number of ECC landscapes, let's say going from 4 ECC systems into a single global instance on the S4 side. Obviously, in that case as well, you could have an S4 landscape that's fully up and running as the remaining waves continue to take place. And in this case, what could also make sense is a scenario in which, as soon as the development has been completed on the ECC side in the development system, it is immediately tagged for dual maintenance, and it immediately goes through a similar process as we were reviewing on the previous slide. But what could then be appropriate is a synchronized deployment to ensure that these changes go through into the respective ECC and S4 QA, pre-prod, or prod systems at the same point in time. Now, this could be especially true if a customer is doing something like a central finance migration, where accounting postings are being replicated from ECC into this S4 central finance system. Obviously, you want those accounting postings to have the same underlying configuration so that they can successfully post, and so that they can post without any inconsistencies. So really, it's very dependent upon each individual customer in the way that they're choosing to migrate, the number of landscapes that they are migrating, as to which model or models may fit best for them. The other piece to consider here that wasn't applicable on the previous example is this step 4. in which you may want to declare a portion of your configuration as, if you like, a template. So you would want the ECC system to be the lead system for this configuration. You wouldn't want that to be maintained on the S4 side, as that could diverge and lead to inconsistencies. Equally, at a certain point in the project, it may be appropriate to say that the S4 system is the lead for a certain subset of configuration. And at that point, you may even want to kind of merge or send your dual maintenance back in the other direction for a period of time. So hopefully that gives a good kind of flavor of what we're talking about with dual maintenance and why it's important to really drive as much automation as possible there and as much governance as possible there, given the risk that that can really entail to the S4 project. Pete, back over to you.
Well, just one, I think, final example here to really emphasize the point in terms of what you were talking about, David. Do you want to just quickly give us the overview of our custom Vistaprint and what they did?
Sure. So Vistaprint were kind of following more that model number one. They had quite an accelerated move to S4. I think their overall duration was like under 9 months or so. They were moving in a brownfield way, but they did want to introduce Fiori as part of that transformation, as part of that move to S4. And at the same time, they were migrating to, at the time, the SAP HEC infrastructure. They had a number of challenges. They were looking to minimize their downtime, but dual maintenance was one of the key things they wanted to address. And as you can see here, the quote from Mukul was really highlighting the fact that with active control in place, that was one of the areas they didn't really have to kind of worry about or stress about as part of that particular transformation. And I think there's more details on that Vistaprint case study on our website.
Absolutely correct. Well, thank you both very much, gentlemen. I mean, I think the individual benefits of automation in those areas are very clear. So, of course, using either smartShift technologies or basis technology solutions, you're going to get lots of benefit, but combining the two together is really where we're going to get the maximum power and this quite unique integrated approach to this management of code change as we move forward in transitioning to S/4HANA. So we have this combined and integrated solution that both David and Arndt have mentioned that really helps us to minimize that manual effort, minimize risk and business disruption, increase the visibility, traceability, governance that you need, and realize value more quickly as you move to S/4HANA. So let's take a look at an example of where that joint solution of both smartShift and Basis have come together. David, you were closely involved with this consumer goods vendor at the time. Can you quickly set the scene for us?
Yeah, so in this particular case, it was a much more complex come-from state in terms of a one-to-many landscape in which a single development system was feeding multiple different production systems, primarily as a way of trying to drive a standard common template of functionality across those different regional systems. Now, what that meant was the overall duration of the transformation was by nature extended because it wasn't a single landscape that was being converted, it was multiple. So I had kind of first-hand experience of the same challenge back when this landscape was converted from 4.5 to ECC 6. And I think end-to-end, this was like a 3 to 4 year program. And I would suspect that whilst it may be slightly shorter given the number of target systems that they are looking at, we would still be talking of a multi-year journey. And that's together with tens of thousands, in fact, just under 100,000 objects, with a massive amount of remediation necessary within those objects, which is why they also selected to bring in smartShift to help automate that. And really, with the combination of these two offerings or capabilities, they were able to do this in a way that minimized the disruption, that avoided the need for a change freeze, and significantly reduced the manual effort and risk associated with that.
Thanks, David. I think you probably covered the story quite well there, but Arndt, was there anything you'd like to add in terms of this particular quite complicated scenario that really saw, I know, a lot of benefit from automation?
Yeah, when I might refer a picture from football, this is definitely the Champions League of dual maintenance. This specific example here, there are so many complexities and moving parts, right, in this story. So we have a release move from ECC to S4HANA. We have consolidation aspects. We have periodic rollouts. We have multi-year project duration, and so on and so forth. And in this scenario, we have changed 90,000 custom objects actually to be compliant with S4 and optimized with S4HANA. And now the customer didn't want to stop and freeze the system, right? That is a typical example. And they have more than 1,000 transports per month, which continuously get shipped into these systems. And so managing this change manually was pretty much not possible. And so combining the capabilities of active control with the transport management capabilities and our automated solution, which helps to actually maintain this dual maintenance for two different releases, which was really a game changer and helped this customer massively in this program. It does not need to be that complex always. Our experience, dual maintenance is always a challenge, because I didn't find any customer who wanted to step development for 6, 7, 8 months. So therefore, it's definitely good to think about how you organize that and how you get support in this area.
Thanks, Arndt. And I think that's a very good point you make. It's certainly something we see with our client basis technologies. We have small SAP installations to the most complex where they're employing automation, and you don't have to be doing all that much to really see value from not doing it manually. But of course, the more complex, the more benefit you're going to see. So let's move on to the final section of today's webinar, where we consider a little bit this future after the S4 transition, because I think, it's often seen as a discrete project, but there's more we can discuss than that, and it's certainly very much the case that automation can continue to help and to deliver value after the initial transition. We're running up a little bit against time, so let's try and move through this section fairly quickly, but I think this is a very important point to start with, in terms of the maintenance cycle for S4HANA, and what that's likely to look like in terms of upgrades and updates compared to what a lot of organizations are used to in their, let's say, old ECC world. So how do you see this, and how do you see the role of automation helping in this part of the future?
Well, Pete, what the heck is this? I thought with S4HANA everything is getting easier. No, whether it is not, right? We hear SAP S4HANA, it's everything is getting nice and easy, but the reality is change will continue. And also, if you look at the release strategy here, which we see on this picture here, there's going to be a lot of change in the systems. And so you definitely need to get in a place where you organize your development pipeline, where you utilize tooling around test automation to actually handle this type of change, which you are expecting also with S4HANA. From an application perspective, that definitely means moving these old monolithic applications you had before in your SAP systems through this kind of change will not be possible. So therefore, we strongly recommend at looking to modernize applications. decouple them, make them more maintainable as units, so that you can get to a more agile DevOps-oriented way of working in this style here.
Thanks, Arthur. I think this is a really important point you've been talking about, because it certainly seems to be growing in awareness, but something that maybe initially wasn't something that everybody realized in terms of the maintenance cycle for S4. Aligned, I think, with what Arndt was talking about there about changing ways of working, is this question of S4 as a catalyst for a broader change of more than technical considerations? And David, we've mentioned, I think, this a little bit a couple of times already, but you know, what other kind of changes are happening around this move to S4, and in particular, how does this idea of agile and DevOps fit into that picture?
Yeah, I think as companies are looking at the S4 transformation, and as they're looking at their code, what's used, what's not used, how they should potentially refactor it, I think if they haven't already done so, they are also looking at the way in which they're delivering change. SAP, obviously, kind of origin story many years ago, and everyone kind of got used to the waterfall way of working in the SAP landscapes in the past, and are now trying to find their way to deploying in SAP in a more agile or DevOps friendly way. Now, S4 is kind of causing them to put that front and center as well. So it's not only a question of how do they get to S4, but once they're on S4, once they need to be able to consume and upgrade every 1 or 2 years, and as they want to be able to deploy change into their production environments, not in every quarter or every 6 months, but potentially even on a monthly, weekly, or even daily basis, like Vistaprint is able to do, it needs to be part of their overall strategic thinking. And again, active control's bread and butter, if you like, is kind of the whole agile DevOps transformation of SAP. The dual maintenance piece is a key additional benefit specifically for that transformation step, but looking at having the right tooling and having that tooling integrate with whatever a customer is doing outside of SAP, because as we all know, every customer isn't just a pure SAP shop. So how does it integrate with their requirements management handling tools like Jira, or their ITSM solutions like ServiceNow? How can we even orchestrate change across multiple different technology stacks with integration into the likes of Jenkins or GitLab or Azure DevOps, etc.? And so that needs to be part of customers' kind of overall architectural thinking, and for the ways in which they're going to do their application development in the SAP space in the future.
Okay, great, thanks, David. So just to round this section off, then let's also look very quickly at this broader evolution of SAP landscapes. Aren't particularly, you've touched on this already, but just to round this section off, can you give us your thoughts on the evolving nature of what it means to have an SAP estate, and the role potentially that automation can play in there as well? I mean, Arndt, do you want to start us off on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's definitely not only with the new initiatives arise with SAP. As we know, there's a strong focus from SAP on cloud adoption, right? And there's also a strong focus from SAP on business process re-engineering and getting to a cleaner SAP core. And what we see here is pretty much the future target architecture, how it could look like for an SAP customer. You move your legacy systems into a more cloud-native way, right? You have your S4 Hana Cloud Edition, where you use the standard in-app extensions and standard tooling from the shelf, or you are going more from a programming model more to RESTful ABAP programming for Fiori style type of application and things like that. And ideally, the SAP core, as I said, is clean, and other applications are moved out to cloud platform, nowadays called business technology platform, and then again as RESTful ABAP, or even as cloud application model, Java, Node.js applications. And still, as I said, not all custom code is bad. So you have to have ways of utilizing and to bring this custom code into these new programming models. And there's a lot of automation you can use there. We have lately starting with many projects in this area. I showed the example from BMW, where we actually moved applications from ECC to another microservice platform based on OpenShift. We are right now working on multiple projects where we use automation to move legacy UI, classical DIMPRO or WebDIMPRO to Fiori applications. And yeah, that's pretty much the value proposition. Using automation to retain the best out of your old systems and to bring them over in a most effective way, utilizing intelligent automation.
Thanks, Arndt. And I mean, I think to be fair, it's very easy for us to draw this on a slide and to describe it in that way. But David, we know, this isn't going to happen overnight. Just give us your final thoughts on this changing nature of SAP.
Yeah, I think as with a lot of what we've discussed today, each customer needs to find their own path towards the kind of the future. I think the same is true here as well. But there is certainly a trend to explore either SAP's kind of platform as a service here, the BTP, or other ways in which they can take some of what's happening today in their kind of in-app extensions that they're doing and find potentially better ways of doing that, which, as I was saying before, it kind of continues to highlight the need for orchestration of change across multiple different technology stacks or types, and really ensuring that you have a kind of a global view of change happening within the enterprise.
Great. Well, thanks, gents. So let's, as I said just now, we're a little bit over time. So let's wrap things up on this overall session of how automation can help to accelerate and de-risk a move to S/4HANA, and in particular in those couple of areas that we've looked at. Certainly, it's true that the combination of basis technologies and smartShift technologies automation is going to deliver value during your S/4HANA transition, but actually it's important as we look at this also to think about the overall journey. We've talked about the after, if you like, the run stage on S4, and when we need to be thinking about updates, maintenance, new ways of working. There may even be a stage before as we need to bring transformation and upgrades to ECC systems to get them ready for S4 migration before we get into those build and dual maintenance stages. But whichever way you cut it, the combination of smartShift and basis technologies automation is going to deliver value to you throughout that process in those areas that we've looked at today. And just to recap where we started earlier before we got into the details, looking at the specific kind of benefits that automation can bring, we are talking about things like eliminating over 90% of the manual effort in these areas. Both Arndt and David talked about the potential acceleration there, really a big reduction in risk through the kind of governance and automated processes that we can bring in. And of course, all of these things around reducing the amount of time and resources and cost and risk and remediation needed help us to bring down the cost of the overall S/4HANA project. And actually these areas can have a significant impact on the overall in terms of a net positive. So to wrap things up in terms of today's session, we have discussed the fact, and I'm sure it's not news to anyone on the call, that there are many different ways we can come at these kind of S/4HANA transformation projects, but there are in any of them numerous technical challenges that we need to overcome, and automation can help us with a lot of those, in particular these areas of custom code remediation and dual maintenance that we've looked at today as places where basis technologies and smartShift technologies can help to add more value to that process and deliver a faster safer and cheaper move to S/4HANA. And again, very importantly, I think we can't stress this enough in terms of the investments we're making around these big transformation programs, that investments in things like tooling and changing the processes that we use to deliver change can continue delivering value in the longer term, not just during that project. So it just remains for me to thank everybody for joining us today, and to our speakers, Arndt and David, who've given us a lot of insight today. If you'd like to follow up with any further questions, or you'd like more information, you can see the contact details of both Arndt and David on the screen here. As I've mentioned, this is a recorded session, and we will be sending out a link within the next day or two to registrants. So if you don't see that, do please let us know. You can get in touch, as I say, at the details on the screen here. Just very quickly, we only have a couple of minutes left for questions, so I'm just going to have a quick look here. Just reading the questions. So I think we've got one here which I think we can cover off. In relation to automated migration of custom code, Arndt, realistically, based on your experience, how much can really be fully automated, and how much manual intervention is still needed in this process to make it practical and realistic?
So let me answer it like that. It wasn't easy to build what we have built today. So ABAP is really one of the most complex programming languages you can find in the market, and so it took us really some time to master it, but we have invested a lot in that, and that brings us as smartShift to a state where we have really high automation rates in the process. So we have 90, 95, 98% in some areas, so really a superior automation. But what we decided for us as a company, that we want to solve problems completely, so we embed these tooling into solutions, and at the end deliver the 100% which is required. Maybe one aspect when you look at S/4HANA, what we figured out from the simplification items you find for S/4HANA, really it was also amazing for us. Usually we find 98 to 99% of these changes to be technical changes, which can also be automated, and only a small fraction of that is really stuff where you need functional refactoring. So my answer also applies for S/4HANA. Even in this space, we can automate really a lot, and therefore speed up and de-risk the process of S/4HANA migrations.
Great, thanks. Well, just in the last couple of minutes we've got left, David, maybe just one question that's related to this. I think to recap something you mentioned earlier, one of our attendees is asking how big an issue this question of dual maintenance really is in the grand scheme of those big technical challenges that we put on at the start of the presentation. Now, I'll paraphrase slightly in that question, but can you just round off with a bit of explanation of how you see that, and also how that fits with what else Active Control can do?
Sure. Obviously, it depends on the volume of change the customer has going through their system in a normal week or month. I know from kind of personal experience that back in the 4.5 ECC migration at the company I used to work for, because of a lack of dual maintenance kind of governance or processes, and given the volume of change, they had to restart the project 2 times and recreate the development system, so that they had a process that would ensure they weren't going to diverge and they weren't going to face issues when they got to the cutover. So I think it can be a very critical and potentially even overlooked area or item. And in general, yeah, Active Control can kind of certainly help out there, but as talked as well, the bread and butter for Active Control is really in finding kind of more automation, more efficiency, and less risk in the day-to-day operation of change within a kind of a full SAP estate, and finding the best way of integrating that estate into a company's chosen tool chain and really looking to bring SAP into the rest of the kind of the world which is operating in an agile way.
Okay, well, thanks very much. Gentlemen, we're slightly over time. We're certainly out of time. So thanks again for joining us today. To our audience, thanks very much for joining this latest Basis Technologies webinar. Do please keep an eye out on our website for future sessions in our regular program, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks very much and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.